Lumumba Naj Allende. Alphabet apt to our age. In answer to your call, I rush out in this rattling harvester and thrash you into type. But what I write brings down no armoured bands. No ministers of the interior interrogate. No one bothers to break in and seize my verses for subversion of the state. Even the little dogmas do not bark. My father was an educational missionary in Bengal before the First World War, and then again just afterwards. He had a kind of radical stance, which certainly rubbed off on me. He was a very staunch supporter of the Indian national movement, and became a friend of Jawaharlal Nehru, who I met myself. I was just a schoolboy then, and he showed me how to hold my bat, you know. And Gandhi was a visitor. All I could remember was I just could see over the sideboard huge piles of fruit that we didn't usually have. But to be more serious, I mean, I always assumed in my childhood that any of the really distinguished visitors in the house that my parents really put themselves out for had been in prison, you know, that anyone who was really distinguished was automatically going to be an enemy of the British government. I was in the army 3 years and served the greater part of that in the Italian theatre.
What is a theatre of war? What sort of show are we going to see? The overture is about to be played. There is a rustling and coughing among the audience. The tank crews gather in groups and look expectantly around the hills. The corps commander climbs down from his vehicle and raises his cane like a baton. The moment hangs, poised above them like a powerful lens, revealing hairline cracks and fissures in their hearts. Inside the wristwatch, the slight steel regulator rocks, exchanging time future into time past. It does not matter if you have not yet been born. You will be marked by this moment more deeply than you will know.
We've always been very supportive and very much influenced by each other. And I would say that it's not only a question that she always reads what I write and criticises it, very helpful and so on. And I usually try and do the same with hers. But the very ideas that go into what I write have been pre-discussed, and I mean, she thinks, and she's probably right, she's got a better memory than I have.
By this time we were earning our livings. We were of an age, we were no longer students, we were setting up our own household, having our own children. We met people on equal terms. And one of the things that you discover is how very ordinary students are, that a lot of the people we met who were engineers or nurses or factory workers knew a lot more than we did.
I think it was helpful to me. Both Dorothy and I did get involved with the Workers' Educational Association and the adult education movement after the war, as indeed did other people like Raymond Williams and Richard Hoggart, and you could go on with a whole list of them. And this business of being a kind of hyphen between academe and more general public, and of learning from working people, because one could still do that in tutorial classes then. You know, you had people who had active experience with the textile industry or the mining industry who would come along to the class. I remember one time I was trying to explain the development of mining in the 19th century. And one of the miners in my class, I said, "Oh, well, let me have the chalk, Mr. Thompson." And he came out and took over the chalk and started to explain it with beautiful diagrams on the board. And I don't only mean that sort of thing, but I mean actually attitudes, a deep and profound skepticism about the official record. The extramural work I did really led directly into my most well-known book, The Making of the English Working Class, which is very much based upon lectures and work I did with my classes in the West Riding. I had a somewhat intolerant attitude towards the academy. I had a sharp resistance to academic formulations of what the problem was, you know, the whole sort of statement of the problematic as it appeared in the academy.
I am seeking to rescue the poor stockinger, the Luddite cropper, the obsolete handloom weaver, the utopian artisan, and even the deluded follower of Joanna Southcott from the enormous condescension of posterity. Their insurrectionary conspiracies may have been foolhardy, but they lived through these times of acute social disturbance, and we did not. Their aspirations were valid in terms of their own experience, and if they were casualties of history, they remain condemned in their own lives as casualties.
It was a rather richer and more rounded view of class than had been offered, particularly in economic history before and in some Marxist history, where class was simply seen as a function of relations of production and almost a sort of inevitable, determined projection. My emphasis was much more upon agency, upon the way in which working people themselves made the kinds of cultural and political forms which emerged.
Our only criterion of judgment should not be whether a man's actions are justified in the light of subsequent evolution. After all, we are not at the end of social evolution ourselves. Causes which were lost in England might in Asia or Africa yet be won.
I was drawn backwards to try and find the origins of some of the problems in the making, and went into 18th century studies.
It is of course true that the food riots in 18th century England were triggered off by soaring prices, by malpractices among dealers, or by hunger. But these grievances operated within a popular consensus as to what were legitimate and what were illegitimate practices in marketing, milling, baking, etc. This, in its turn, was grounded upon a consistent traditional view of social norms and obligations, of the proper economic functions of several parties within the community, which, taken together, can be said to constitute the moral economy of the poor. An outrage to these moral assumptions, quite as much as actual deprivation, was the usual occasion for direct action.
I was actively involved in the communist-supported peace movement of the time, which was a genuine alliance of communists, Labour, IOP, radical Methodists, what have you. We were very comradely group of people. The trouble was a certain sort of piousness which got into us all, in which we followed certain parts of the line. Ever since World War II, I felt the Cold War was an artificial and unnecessary fracture, division of the world, and that healing that fracture was as important as resisting and diminishing the armaments. I mean, the two things went together. I became convinced that the threshold of the security state was rising all the time, and this was related to a new stage in the ideological Cold War. And then when I heard about the cruise missiles which were coming along with the, the welcome of the British government, it was going to put them down all over these islands, I just blew my top, and I decided that they weren't going to do that if I could stop it.
NATO out of Britain, Britain out of NATO is an excellent slogan, but it must be a slogan taken together with a nuclear-free Europe and with the breakup of both blocs. Thank you.
I think the peace movement shifted the vocabulary. You remember, before it started, Kissinger and people were talking about persuading people that atomic weapons were just another sort of weapon. And nobody now thinks atomic weapons are just another sort of weapon.
I have this deep suspicion of theory with a capital T. I think the theoreticism greatly distanced from practice, which is rather characteristic of our time. And I don't mean in one field, but in a great many fields. I mean, in literary criticism or in some of the new developments in literature and so on. I think you're probably going to have some people who stand outside that and write in a sharper way. Also, it's supposed to be vulgar in contemporary discourse to actually say anything that means very much or has any passion behind it. And so you've got to find a new way of writing to do this, I think.